now that we've landed in. Do you know what I think is the coolest thing too, though, is like, ever since we've met, and I think this would be a good segue into talking about that, but I remember that time where I said to you, when you just have those conversations with people and you just wish that you had a recording device or you would have recorded that whole thing. And I think we've already had so many of those experiences in such a short time that we've met. Thankfully, it just sparked this idea for us to just do it, right? And I don't know about you, if there's ever been times where you've had just those random conversations with people and you just wish, you're like, oh, I wish we could have recorded this whole thing. It was going to change the world, or it just made such an impact, or so
I think
excited to do that.
I think that's a beautiful reminder of how something as simple as a conversation between two people can really support. And I think that we're in this era of wanting to learn and hear from each other because past generations, based on what I've seen, there's certain things that are taboo or you have to keep private. And right now, what I see is a lot of people really opening up and being vulnerable and sharing the challenges of this human experience. And then that gives permission and inspiration to others. And it makes me think too about with my family situation. I always felt called to speak more on that, but then also kind of hesitant to not ruffle feathers. But ultimately, I feel like at the core, I feel like, no, I know there's people out there who would really benefit from hearing what my journey was and where I've landed. And maybe that could help them, even if it's just one person. So I
Mhm.
feel like recognizing the power of that. And I feel like almost every conversation we have, because we dive so deep together, and then one of us will share something and the other one just expands on it or shares, oh, and then we start to make all these connections.
Mhm. That's what I feel. I feel like it's very intentional yet unintentional, right? And maybe that's the part of us that's like just present and we're not having those surface level conversations. Like our soul just really wants to have these intentional conversations, but they're so unintentional because you just bring up something and then it's like, poof, we go off here. And then, or I bring up something and poof, we go off here. So I'm excited to do this with you. I think I really do. I think people are going to be able to pull out little pieces that sometimes when you're like, oh, I just needed to hear that today, or oh, that sparked an interest for me. I'm going to check this out. And
Mhm.
so that's my intention. And I think you're similar when we talked about just doing this and coming up with not your cup of tea. And maybe I don't, I want you to tell your part of the story about how you found me, but maybe I'll start in the when we were collaborating and stuff like that. I remember we were just trying to think, like, what could we do together? And you started to talk all about how sometimes I just don't fit in that. It's like this peg. I just don't fit in that box. And I was talking about how I just don't seem to fit into systems and
Mhm.
things. And that's where I just was like, hey, I think you were talking about the drink. You're just like, I don't know. I'm just like not that cup of tea or something. And hey, maybe that needs to be our little topic is that it's okay to be different. And then we find those people that are like us and that want to have those conversations. And I was telling you about the sweater that I had that I'm just not for everyone. And I loved that sweater because it made me stand tall to be like, I'm me and it's okay to be me. And I don't have to fit into that little peg anymore or be part of or fawn, maybe mask myself to be part of a certain space that. So I just loved when we said, how about not your cup of tea? Because we might just have some of those conversations that make us different, but maybe it'll also give people to feel comfortable that they also might feel that way too.
Mhm.
And they can find their other little piece that's not their cup of tea in the world too.
Mhm. So if you're not a cup of tea, what beverage would you be, Leslie?
Ooh. I feel like it always changes, But it's like today, when I was telling you about what I made here, I made this cup of cacao. And I feel like it really is me because there's this bitterness to it, but it's like there's also this richness of it. And there's a little bit of honey and a little bit of cayenne pepper. I forgot to say a little bit of cayenne pepper in there. So I feel like it's the ultimate bitter, sweet, spicy. And then I topped it off with the cold foam, the French vanilla cold foam, which I feel like is just like that perfect little cloud. So I'm like, I think that best describes you. All those little touches.
Mm.
Uh, and weirdly, all those things can come together, right? A little bit of sweet, a little bit of
Mm.
spicy, a little bit of warm and safe, and it all comes together in this nice glass. And I'm like, that's who I am. So,
Mm.
how about you? When you're not that cup of tea?
I'm not a cup of tea. That's actually how that comment came up because I was telling you how that's a very common phrase for people to say, I'm not everyone's cup of tea. And one day I was thinking, well, I don't even think I would be tea because I don't really drink much tea. I'll have a milk tea latte, but I don't really, well, I guess milk tea is a latte, but I like to have like thicker consistent. I've just never really been like a tea person. And one day I was thinking, well, what would I be if I wasn't tea? And then I drink a lot of cacao. So I was like, ooh, I feel like I would be more that earthy, heart opening, supporting you to be in your self-reflection and just really softening and opening up to life. And then I also work with the mushrooms. So I was like, I feel like I would need a sprinkle of some magic mushrooms in there with the cacao. And that would be what I hope my presence brings to people.
Wow.
A little bit of
Wow.
magic sprinkled in with the heart opening. So,
I would say, just in knowing you this short period of time, I think that is exactly what it is. And before we started recording, you talked about that
sparkle.
and field. And I was just thinking, that's exactly what you're describing, how I see you. There's just this really earth grounded present with just a little dash of sparkle. And so that's when you're trying describing the mushrooms, I'm like, oh, it's just that little dash of sparkle.
It's so funny because I feel like when I first started my spiritual awakening, I wanted to be just the sparkly part all the time. And I didn't really see the value in the grounding and being like really anchoring into your actual human experience. I wanted to float up in the ethers all the time because that was so new and shiny and so different from the density and heaviness of what I had moved through as a human. But I
Mm.
almost wonder if people kind of need to move through that contrast and then like I almost see it. So if you're going through your human experience and you're in this autopilot and you're not very aware yet, then when you have a spiritual awakening, whether it's activated by health thing or just an experience you have, that almost shoots you up into those ethers. And then maybe then there's this process of coming down and finding that how do I honor both my human and my divine self because I'm both, because we're not just one or the other. I feel like that could be a whole another conversation.
And I think too, you're right, but there's a difference between the density of that human density when we're going through something versus a groundedness. And when you were talking about that, I can remember when I felt that density of and heaviness of things, but that was different than what I feel now
Hmm.
in the sense of that earth and supported and nurtured and grounded and present.
Hmm.
It doesn't have a density to it. It just has this flow to it. which I feel again is then allows us to have a different relationship with what you were talking about, yeah, ethers and the divine. Because I always just think about the anchor. It's like that helium balloon or all those things that are just floating in the wind. It's wonderful. It's great as long as it has a space. Oh, here it is, right? Otherwise, it's just gone.
Yeah.
And I think lots of people, especially when they're going through something that's so dense and so heavy and feels hard,
Mm.
I think that's a natural thing to want to do is to go to that place of the ethers. And because it feels magical, it feels light, it feels, you get a lot of information from there. But pretty soon, then all of a sudden we have this part where it's like, oh, I always just want to
Mhm.
be there. But I think the coolest part is when they can cohabitate together. You can get all of that beautiful, magical information from there, and then you can begin to use it in a way that supports you on your human journey um, in that grounded, present way.
Mhm. Mm. And I feel like in the last year, that's really what I've been anchoring into is how do I take that magic and then infuse it into my journey so that it's both and not this or that. Because otherwise, we go into spiritual bypassing or using your spirituality as escapism. At one point, when I worked with the mushrooms, I realized I was kind of wanting them to save me and relying on them to be the magic instead of recognizing that the magic already exists within me and in my life, and they are just helping support me. And then I started having this practice of really being very intentional and slowing down and asking, is today a microdose day? Instead of just automatically going, and I feel like I need more magic, so let me turn to them for the magic. And I almost could even feel like they were telling me they were also kind of setting that boundary with me of you can't use us in this way. So I feel like, especially when we grow up and none of this is really taught or shared, it was very underground. Now you find energy workers and practitioners all over the place, but it was very underground before. So I think just that excitement of, oh wow, this is a whole nother way to live. But I do think that it definitely, from my experience, having some way to ground it is so important. And for some reason, people don't really talk about that.
And if you think about that, if we go back to, let's say, for example, the mushrooms, how grounded they are. When you said the underground, I remember there was that show on Netflix. It was all about the mushrooms and the communication and everything, the networking that's taking place underground versus what you're seeing above ground. And I think that is an excellent example of the mushroom of it needs that earth based, it needs all of that sort of thing. And it has the elements of magic that we can't even describe. I love on my acreage, there are so many different types of mushrooms that grow. And after seeing that show on Netflix, I'm always just kind of intrigued by, whoa, this one over here, that they have this way of communication. And I think just even you bringing that up is when we were talking about what we wanted to talk about today around discernment. I
Mhm.
think that's an excellent, like that we don't just do something because it's the new thing to do or I want this thing to do for me, is that we are using our discernment. And so just because microdosing is the new thing, well, every day I'm just going to microdose, but the fact that you just said, then I stopped and I had to use my discernment to say, what was the intention of this again?
Mhm.
Is this something that I need to do every day? What are the mushrooms saying to me? Then I think we make choices from a completely different space
Mhm.
because we are using discernment. And maybe I was just thinking, I was like, maybe we don't even realize that we're using discernment a lot more than we even think in our lives when we choose to slow down and make a decision based on today in this present moment versus, oh no, I microdose all the time. Well, they're still going to be in the cabinet tomorrow, and I'll check in tomorrow.
Mhm.
And maybe that's a way to look at it, not just from that person, but from everything. Because how many times I just even think I have this plethora of supplements on the counter that
Mhm.
I'm like, oh, I should be taking this.
Mhm.
But what if every day I checked in with each one of those bottles and just like, um, do I need you today? And maybe today it was only three of them, and then tomorrow maybe it's five of them, versus just taking that handful of supplements every day and just being, oh, okay, I'm supposed to take
Mhm.
these. But maybe it's creating a different relationship, one of trusting ourselves, and then two, that the body's not always, I'm just talking about supplements and mushroom things, like nothing's ever permanent. Maybe there is this space of, I don't know what the word for that would be, but just like a presence, maybe.
Mhm. I think what I'm gathering from what you're sharing is the difference between just going through the motions of this is what I've learned to do, and then actually slowing down to be present, to tune in. Does this feel right? What, and how I'll say it, you meet that moment as if it's the first time you've ever met it. So you have that full presence to just be there and really tune in what feels true right now. And you remove any of the past experiences and what's a routine, and then you allow for what needs to be met in that space.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, how I think I want to take a moment and maybe share a little bit about what we both feel discernment is, and maybe just see from there how the conversation flows in case people may not be aware or haven't really considered. So, how would you describe discernment? And if you want me to go first, I can.
A description. I think it's a lot of things for me. But for me, it's a lot about, and you'll laugh because I talk like this all the time, but it's a feeling of, I've always, I mentioned to you, I said I use this phrase often with myself and with people. And it's just because we can doesn't mean we should. And for me, especially, I may have this feeling or I may have this knowing. And maybe it comes from a place of being a, let's call it, rehabbed fixer. There's a version of Leslie who always wanted to fix everything for people. So people would come for advice, and I was the person they'd come and I think I was, no, Leslie will fix it. And I've shown up so much like that in my life. And then when I started to see that just because you can doesn't mean you should, one, I felt like it started to empower people to go, Leslie doesn't need to be the fixer. That I can empower them to be the fixer of whatever their situation was.
Mhm.
So that's helped me in a lot of places like relationships, motherhood, my healing business, because I just keep reminding myself just because I can doesn't mean I should. How can I approach that discernment between giving someone back their power to make changes themselves I know this is not part of the, maybe this is where I started to recognize discernment in my life, especially when it came to my healing business. And there was these very specific sort of examples where I started to see that I was like, oh, this doesn't feel good. Someone wasn't respecting like, those energetic boundaries. Because I always think with discernment, there's this space of when someone physically says, oh, are you okay to hug? You're asking consent. But sometimes in the spiritual world, when it comes to energy and these types of things, there's just not the same line of respect with some people. And the moment that my body feels sort of, oh, this doesn't feel good when you're starting to tell me that you saw a past life with us together. And I'm just like, whoa, I never asked for this. So I'm going to give this back to you. This is yours. And I realize now all of those things taught me that about my own discernment. How many times did I so eager to share something or wanted to that maybe I didn't even realize I was crossing that? But I remember with a teacher once, I was learning from her. She was probably one of my very first teachers. And she had this Facebook group. And in the Facebook group, one of the students had said, oh, by the way, last night when you were sleeping, I worked on you and your daughter, and this came up. And so I healed this and this. And I remember just reading it and just like goosebumps all over my body. I just thought, whoa, how is the teacher going to feel about this? Because I know if someone told me that, oh, by the way, I felt this, so I just went ahead and did this, I would not like that. And I remember the teacher coming and just saying, oh, no, this is not, I did not give you permission to whatever gave you the idea that you could go in and think that this was an issue for me or this was an issue for my daughter and then just say that you're going to heal that. She's like, everything you're saying is not true because I never accepted that. And two, I don't accept that. She sort of gave it back. But the trigger there was that this person was saying, well, then you're just so ungrateful. You're making this about you're the teacher and I'm the student. And she handled it very well. She just said, no, this is not about I'm the teacher and I'm the student. This is a really good learning moment to really go into that space of just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Mm-hmm.
And to always ask permission around that. And I've mentioned that in working with lots of people to just, yes, something might intuitively come to our minds. Or, yes, that piece of advice around, I'm a mom, I've been through this before. I should just say, oh, you should do this and this. But it's like, whoa, just stop and just be, use that discernment to say, is this you overstepping those boundaries? Or could you approach it in a way of saying, oh, I hear you. I'm holding space for that. And if you ever need my support or if you never need anything, I'm here. And that might be just the thing that opens up the door to them going, hey, actually, I would like to hear what you have to say about that. And then that conversation has opened. So I don't know if that's really a even I don't know if that's a definition, but it's I think it just explains how I feel about discernment.
Mm-hmm. So, to add on to what you shared, I would say for me, discernment is about sovereignty. So, it's knowing my journey is my own. What happens in my journey, no matter how similar to someone else's, just because they move through something similar, doesn't mean mine will unfold in that way. And when we have respect for our own journey, we can then also have respect for other people's journey and know where those boundaries are and keep that level of respect for all. So sovereignty, I feel like is part of the conversation when it comes to discernment. And I think it's also a sense of giving our power back to ourselves and not giving it out to others or to situations. So when there's always going to be people's opinions and observations, but just because someone had a certain observation doesn't make it truth. And oh, so this is one of the things I've learned on my journey is there is no the truth. Everyone has been taught this is the right way. This is what you should be doing. This is the way, the truth. I don't believe in that anymore because what I've experienced and witnessed on this human journey is that everyone has their own truth
Mhm.
because your life is filtered through your experiences and where you're at in this moment, how you're feeling emotionally, how you talk to yourself, what your experiences with people are, where your nervous system is at. There's so many factors. So I even have stopped telling people, oh, I had the same experience as you because I realized who am I to say that it's the exact same experience? So instead, I say I have moved through something similar because I
Wow.
want to
Love that.
honor that I don't know what it's like to walk in their shoes. And there's maybe some golden thread here that has weaved through our journeys, but it probably isn't the exact same. Even if anyone follows or has listened to Gabor Mate, he does a lot of work around childhood trauma. And one of the things he shares is no two kids ever have the same parent. Even if
Mhm.
they, no matter how much of a age gap there is between the siblings, they're not growing up with the same parents because the parents are in a different part in their journey. The bond and relationships between each kid and parent is different. So for us to say, oh, I went through the same thing, and I think in the coaching healing industry, this is where it becomes really dangerous because people identify their journey. I did this myself. I kept hearing all these spiritual entrepreneurs saying, I left my 9 to 5 and took this leap of faith, and spirit supported me. And I've just been doing my business for the past 7 years and I haven't looked back. But guess what? I really wanted that to be my story. And that was not how it unfolded for me. And I had so much frustration around that. And it wasn't until I started accepting that, oh, I guess my resources, my journey, maybe it's different than this. And I just have to accept that and work with what I have right now. And I think too, what I've been learning is that deeper connection with other humans comes when we can really meet each other. I'm feeling energetic confirmation right now as I say this. So there's something sparking up. That connection that we want with other humans, it happens in those spaces where we can just be there and say, hey, what do you need? And leave it up to them. That's another thing I've shifted to doing where before I was similar to you, wanted to help and to fix and just I sometimes when you can see things from that outside perspective, you can either headed down this path, let me try to help you get out of that. But people sometimes they're not ready, they're not willing. So many different things could be happening. So it's not up to us to choose for that person. And I think that's where that discernment and respect of this, their sovereignty comes in. And so, what I started asking when someone comes to me and says, hey, I need help or I need advice or comes and just starts sharing something, I stop and I ask, would you like me to just be here and hold space for you? Or do you actually want to hear my perspective on this situation? And I leave it in their hands. And the more I've done this, the more those conversations are just so much easier to have, smoother. You don't accidentally overstep that boundary with that person who maybe just needed space held and just to feel heard by you trying to push your perspective onto them. And I think just being with what is and not trying to piece together all the history of what we may have seen in the past and try to make that their situation. I feel like that has really opened up doors in connecting with other humans, which is one of the things I'm learning in this lifetime, how to be better at that because I was not very good at it growing up.
Do you think that brings me to something though? Do you think that the possibility that the closer we get to being really honest about our own stuff and knowing ourselves so well, that it gives us that advantage between sort of discerning this is mine, that sovereignty. I know my shit. I know my stuff. And so then it gives us this space of when we're projecting or, oh, no, no, that's yours and that's mine. It gives us this discernment. And especially, I think, in this, when we are open, lots of healers, lots of people coaching and do those things. I think oftentimes they are just naturally empaths and feelers, but also that discernment between that it's not our responsibility to take all of that on. And what I realized is when I actually stopped looking outward to do that and I started turning inward and looking at myself, it was much easier for me to start to use discernment because I've been so lucky in a lot of the training sessions. And I've talked about somatics, like how magical somatics is. But I would say that is that one thing that's helped me to go slow down, stop, be with myself. And then that way I know I'm knowing myself, this is a trigger for me, or this is an activation for me, or no, I am at neutral. But I'm knowing how my nervous system is responding. I'm knowing what perception I have in the game. And therefore, then I can keep that container about myself and show up differently for the person that I'm going to show up with. So, do you think on your journey that would you say that you had a similar experience that once you started to recognize yourself in the game, that you had a lot more discernment in the way you showed up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think whatever work we do with ourselves, because we're with ourselves 24/7, we are the human who we know the best, right? Because we spend the most time we're in our inner world, and when you take the time to explore that and to meet different parts of you, I feel like that's how I'm able to hold space for people when they're feeling frustrated, upset, spiraling down, confused, because I've met myself there. And so I'm
Mhm.
able to recognize that in others because even though we have these unique journeys, at the end of the day, we do have some things that kind of bring us together in certain ways that we may function in certain parts of us. Everyone has an inner world. And for me, the journey has definitely been more of this homecoming to myself because I was so disconnected from myself. And that's how I went into people pleaser patterns and constantly trying to get to the next destination to experience fulfillment or joy or happiness. And the minute I started taking that radical responsibility of my life and myself, that's when everything shifted.
I would agree too. Just in the little conversations we had about those patterns of our nervous system before, that fawning and people pleasing. Oftentimes, I think when we are in that space of our nervous system, it is very difficult to use discernment because there's just a whole lot of stuff going on for us that our brain is just not able to make sense of that.
Mhm.
And then it also brings me to this space of being able to take accountability when we start to reflect on that inner part of ourselves and go, well, this is the role I played in it,
Mm-hmm.
take accountability for that part. And then we change, then we make different choices the next time. Because I also think for me, I really want to preface this for anyone who's listening to it. It's not about perfection, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is not about what this is about at all. It's just the part around knowing that I can always do better because there's going to be times where maybe in the moment I say or do something. But for me now, if I realize that, then a repair can be made. And that might be Eva, yesterday when we were talking, I reflected on a comment that I made. And I realized that maybe it was out of line, or maybe in the moment I shouldn't have said that. Could we talk about that?
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel about that? And then maybe you respond with like, oh, actually, I didn't even take anything away from that. Oh, so the person just heard it and was like, yeah, it's not for me and let it go. Or, oh, I'm glad you brought that up because actually last night I was thinking about that and I was wondering, how am I going to approach that with you? And I think this leads to, for me, these really significant relationships that I have in my life right now are people that I can do that with. We can create that repair, that it's safe enough for me to call you up and say, "Hey, this is what I might have done. I might have overstepped." Or, "Hey, actually, today when I said I was available for you, I had a lot of stuff going on in my head, and I just, after I reflected on it, and I didn't show up when I told you that I could show up."
Mm-hmm.
For me, if someone says that to me and they acknowledge, because I feel it, you're like, oh, something just feels off here. And maybe it's as simple as those sermon is as simple as those sacred yes and hell knows. That when I honor my, I'm sorry, I can't show up for you today like that, Eva, then it's like you're like, oh, she's being radically honest with me about where she's at.
Mm-hmm.
But I also know that when she says yes, she really means she's going to hold that space and she's going to be there for me. And I think that's really changed the significant relationships in my life because I know those handful of people who, one, will not get offended when I say that, two, are going to show up for me on the other side exactly the same way, and three, are going to take responsibility when maybe, oh, I had this moment where I said I could and I couldn't, and they reflect back.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciate that honesty. I don't want perfection. I just want honesty and real.
Mm-hmm. I feel really similarly to you as I reflect on the friendships and connections that I've had throughout the years. I feel like what you're describing is something we're definitely in the learning phase of as a
Mm.
collective because it's not really very common and modeled to see that radical responsibility. And when we talk about communication, I say that there's always a way to communicate it where you're being respectful of the other person and you're also honoring your truth. You don't have to be rude to someone. And I think a lot of times when the conversations around setting boundaries, people are afraid of how is this other person going to receive this. But knowing that if you're coming from your heart, and you are just expressing what feels true for you, and your intention is not to hurt that other person, I feel like at some point there's only so much of your role in that experience, right? And all you can do is just be open and honest and say, this is where I'm at. I hope you can understand. And sometimes people understand, and other times they may not, but whatever their response is to, we can't always be taking responsibility for others because also you can't do anything about that person's life. I think also as women, there's this conversation of taking care of everyone else and not really knowing how to pour into us. and feeling like it's our responsibility to make sure everyone else is taken care of. But sometimes that comes at the consequence of self-sacrificing. And I feel like that's really where we're starting to learn to draw that line and say, oh, we can't be doing that because that's actually detrimental to us. And all you can do is really show up and, like you said, be honest about where you're at. If something changes, things change all the time. And I also feel very similarly to you, where if someone can just come to me and let me know, I think I get more annoyed when I can feel that something has shifted and people are either, uncomfortable or afraid to speak it to me and let me
Mm,
know and have that conversation. I'm like you, where I just really I'm telling spirit, I'm open for those connections where we can have those conversations because I don't have
mm,
time for playing and guessing games and assumption. I can't do that anymore. I want
mhm.
those people who have that self-awareness and we can come together. It's not going to be perfect. It's going to be messy.
Oh, it's gonna be messy. It's messy and scary because it's new.
I think it's hard to, I'm speaking about this, everyone should be able to do this, but it is a process too. It's a journey together of getting to know each other, of building that connection. With my boyfriend, we've been together 5 to 6 years now, and we have that foundation of trust, of honesty, where he is the first one I've been able to have conversations and say things that I'm thinking that in previous relationships, I would have felt like, oh, we might break up because of this conversation, or I can't say that to him. And having experienced that, I feel like now I just want more of it and more people that I can have that with because it's just a whole different dynamic when you're able to be that open and it connects you deeper to each other.
Mm. You're right. Because it's like, again, we're not asking for perfection. We're asking for honesty. We're asking for people to speak the unspoken in the room. Like you said, when you can just feel it, you're like, I just feel like something's off. And I'm saying I'm still practicing this as well because it is scary. And I'm grateful for the handful of people that I have who are practicing this with me because there is that one foundation of trust, there's that foundation of safety. And so, what was the saying? I love you so much that I'm willing to risk your disapproval by saying this. This is how I felt when this took place, right? And it's coming from a place of love. Not, oh, you did this to me. It's more of a, I want this to grow. I want this to go somewhere. And so therefore, if I keep holding on to my tongue and I don't say, sometimes when I ask for you to show up for me, and you don't show up for me, I feel like I'm feeling like I'm not a priority. And it's like the other person on the other end can say, oh, well, let me sit with this. It's not a personal attack. It's more of a way of going, I might be activated. I might be triggered because sometimes that's our first sort of response to be like, oh my gosh, I was a bad person. What did I do? We go into our story of the thing. But no, when we come back just to the piece of it and just hold and validate, let me look at that. Where was it that I didn't show up? You're right. I said I could and I didn't. I always use this example sometimes with my clients and people too, is I'll say, we know the difference between this thing. When I'm being a bitch to someone because I know that they're maybe setting a boundary that I don't like, or I'm just activated and triggered. And it's like that person says to me, you're being a real bitch. Yes, I am. And it's coming from a place of like, oh crap, here's my triggers, right? Versus you holding a boundary and then someone saying to you, you're just being such a bitch. And I say to myself, I always check in. I'm not saying I walk around in the world and that's often the thing, but I always like to use it as example because I think people know the difference between one, when they're being a bitch, and two, when someone calls them that and they're just holding those boundaries. And so in that circumstance, and I check in with myself and I go, actually, no, I'm not. I'm just holding a boundary that you don't like. And so therefore you're going to use that word to try to make me feel a certain way. And I don't, because I know when I am. And I often say that to clients, like, get real good at knowing your triggers and how you behave in that sort of way. Because then you yourself can discern between, is this an activation or a trigger for me? And this is why I'm behaving this way. Or is this person trying to put a label on me? And no, I'm not taking it. It's not sticking because I'm just setting a boundary.
I've had very similar situations too where I've had conversations where my boyfriend will say, I feel like you did this and your intention is this, and I check in with myself, and sometimes he's right and he calls me out,
Mhm.
and I need that reflection, and I'm willing to go there and admit, you're right, thanks for calling me out, because it was hard for me to see it because I was in it. But other times I can really feel, and it's a practice. You just keep coming back to it, you keep practicing. Other times I can feel like, no, this feels like it's something in you, and it doesn't feel like this is mine. And it's definitely like a sensation or like knowing that I'll have. So that discernment between mine versus someone else's really helps us keep in check. And this week I was listening to this podcast, and we can wrap it up on this quote. I don't, what was her name? Dr. Thema Bryant. She talks about homecoming to yourself and really inspirational. She talked about when we have relationships where we cannot speak our truth, then
Mhm.
if we speak our truth and that relationship falls apart, that's a gift, because that means that relationship was rooted in our silence and not in our
Mm.
truth. And that spoke to my core when I heard her say that. And I was like, yes, when I started setting those boundaries and saying, I'm not available for this anymore, it makes space for those relationships where you can have those deeper connections, but it requires you to show up and stand up and advocate for yourself.
Mhm. And that also brings me to that when you were talking about that truth thing, right? It's that there's this level of respect around, I respect that you have your truth that is different from my truth, but can we both speak about our truths and still respect one another? And that's where I feel like myself and still in a space of growing and learning to be able to do that in some relationships that don't feel safe because I feel that I can do that. I can respect where you're coming from on your views and your values and things like that. But I still have that edge or that fear that on the same side, if I were to really express how I was feeling about something or my values on something, that I would be dropped. And then when you were saying that, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's what I got to be okay with is that the people that I do have in my life, I don't have to filter. I don't have to change their mind on their view. I can still be in my view, but it's this place of this respect for the person so much that it's okay for them to have that. And you're not expecting them to change just to create that. So that's a really good reflection for me of when you're saying it's okay for some of those. And again, maybe the opposite is maybe it won't be dropped. Maybe I'm assuming that that person still won't be able to hold me in the way that I'm silencing myself. But ultimately, once I open up, maybe I do give them the opportunity to say, yeah, that's cool. I'm cool with this. I don't, this is my way and that's your way. And this is still a great relationship. So, but only I can do that. I have to allow them, I have to give them the opportunity to either drop me or say, oh, that's cool, I got you, versus still silencing myself.
And I think also what you're speaking to is, I think in those moments, those are either an invitation to ask yourself, is this is what I've done in the last few weeks where some triggering, activating event happened with someone, and then I ask myself, is this an invitation for me to advocate? Am I meant to speak up and express this to this person? Or is this something I'm meant to just work on my own side? And because it was triggering for me, so there's something within me that's bothered by it. And I think sometimes it's I think being open is really awesome, and there's time and a place, and sometimes people can't meet us there, or maybe we need to wait until later on where we can have that conversation. It feels safer with that distance when we're not activated actively to
Mhm.
have that conversation. We'll do that with my boyfriend where we'll talk about it after we've both calmed down and had some space where we can both meet each other in that space and really honor where that other person's coming from and explore, why do you think you were feeling that way? Where does that come from? Because usually there's deeper layers, but I think usually it's an invitation and checking in with yourself. Is this a moment for me to speak up? I'll ask Divine Spirit, and people can check in with whatever they feel resonant. Is this a moment for me to actually speak up and say something? Sometimes that is what is needed. Or is this time for me to just work on my end of things? And that's what it is.
Mhm. Mhm. And when I think, as you're talking, and I'm thinking about different examples in my life where I felt this knowing that I needed to speak up about something. For me, it was like this knowing in my body. It was just like, I can't be silent on this.
Mhm.
I need to share because maybe someone could have been harmed but it's coming from this place. And then there's other times in my life where I check in, you know what, it's okay to hold your tongue on this. There's growing and it's not harming anyone. And there's no, I think what you and I are saying as we come to a close of this, there's no hard, fast rules. It's ultimately what you and I talk about a lot is presence, slowing down, checking in with ourselves. I think as people watch us over the next few weeks, they're probably going to see a lot of the same themes of the way we feel about certain things when we have these discussions. And oftentimes we're bringing them back to ourselves.
Mhm.
Why did I feel the need to take that action or speak up or set that boundary, whatever it is? But that we can come back. This is what the intention was. And it came from a very thoughtful place rather than just a response to, which is more of a trigger. And I've had to give myself, in this process of learning, I've had to give myself, so you have a timeout for the next 3 days. So you don't respond. You sit with what is yours and then you can meet it. So,
Mhm. I had some things floating in my head about what I wanted to share. And then I feel like sometimes when I'm listening and being really present and I'm so focused on that, and then the thoughts are like, oh, we're just gonna run away now.
yes. But isn't that the way about communicating? I think that's really telling about how sometimes we're learning a new way of communication. Because I know sometimes when I'm communicating with someone and I'm having all of that, I'm going to say this next, I'm going to say this, versus being present with the conversation and having those thoughts come up and letting them just flow. It's like, I think they're communicated anyways because they don't necessarily always need to be said.
Thank you for that reminder. Hmm.
Well, thank you for this. Maybe we didn't get into the story of how our paths crossed, but I think it'll probably come up in some of our other discussions because I think it'll be pretty cool. I think when we share that with people, and maybe it'll be a space of opening them up to just trusting when people kind of show up in their DM or show up in their calendar or meet up randomly at the grocery store, whatever that is. But I think there'll be a time and a place where whoever watches this will see, hey, how did this beautiful soul from Wisconsin and this beautiful soul from Alberta cross paths when they didn't even meet each other in person?
Yes, we'll just allow
Um,
the journey to unfold. Oh, thank you so much, Leslie. This
thank
was a
you.
pure joy.
Thank you. I appreciate it.